Good morning, everyone. All right, we have 3 items today, and I'm not totally sure we're going to get to the third. The first one is going to be a very full discussion on tenant issues and tenant advocacy and organizing. And this is a follow-up on the council's deliberation and discussion on a proposal from the county executive to increase our investments in tenant organizing. We had a very full conversation about the issue at the council, and we're following up today on that discussion here at the committee. And Linda has prepared a very helpful packet that walks through a number of issues and provides different resources. So I'm going to turn it to Linda to walk us through the packet, and we'll introduce our participants at the dais at the appropriate time.
So this discussion did come out of the discussions you had during budget, but it's really an opportunity for the PHED committee, at least for the beginning of this discussion, to have a conversation about tenant advocacy services and tenant organizing services, which is something that actually I don't think the PHED committee has had in many years, and certainly the new PHED committee hasn't had an opportunity for that. So you have a panel discussion today with several organizations who are involved with that. Unfortunately, AIM was not able to be here this morning. They are listed in your memo as participating, but they are unable to attend. But we have DHCA, we have the Renters Alliance, CASA, MHP, and HOC here to discuss the different aspects and approaches to how we help tenants to be empowered, to have good relationships with landlords, to be able to resolve problems, to be able to help them advocate, and to have technical assistance that's provided through funding from the county in order to support having really robust tenant organizations. And so I've asked that the organizations each give you about 5 minutes of opening remarks so that they can give you some of their perspective. And we may have to rotate some people out, but I tried to get a couple extra chairs up there. And in the packet, just as background to this, I did give you some summary of the contracts that the county has with CASA, Renters Alliance, and MHP currently. So that would give you some summary points of the things that we contract with them to do, some of the apartment communities that they've been active in, the work that they have reported on. DHCA can also share with you how they help to identify some of the apartment communities, because they work together with the organizations who are their contractors. They work together to identify places where they think that this is helpful and needed. And then also you'll have a chance to hear from DHCA's tenant advocate, who now works in landlord-tenant, and is one of the adjustments that was discussed during the FY20 budget. So with that, I think the organizations are available to give you their opening comments.
Okay, why don't we invite the organizations up, and I'll say for my colleagues, why don't we have a nice discussion about issues in general, and once we have concluded a good dialogue so that we are deepening our expertise in tenant organizing, then we can turn to this issue of the contract and all those kind of questions. But this should be just a really full discussion so that we can become more expert in what the groups do, how they do it, what the county's role is, and all those kinds of things. All right, terrific. So while we ask our Acting Director Getzinger, we'll start with you. You can introduce yourself and then invite the groups up. And Director.
Great. Thank you. Tim Getzinger, Acting Director, Department of Housing and Community Affairs, and with me I have our new tenant advocate, Maureen Harzinski.
Okay, welcome.
McRae Moody and Stephanie Killian.
Very good. Ms. Harzinski, where do you tell us about your background?
Well, I've been with the county quite a number of years. I've originally I've been in the Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs for 9 years as an investigator.
Okay.
I also have experience in the affordable housing programs. I was there for 5 years, and I'm thrilled now to be the tenant advocate on behalf of the office.
Okay, terrific. Very good. And Ms. McRae Moody, you're a familiar face to us here. You helped us work our way through the legislation a few years ago, and you're always present.
Manager, Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs. We're just trying to, continue our mission to improve the relationship between landlords and tenants in the county. And we're doing a very robust business. We're doing about 61 formal complaints each month, and around, let's see, where's my number? I forgot. Let's see how many calls we're getting every month. We're getting 9,900 a year, but we get around 821 a month on average.
821 calls
311.
from tenants seeking information, support, something.
So we're doing pretty well. I'm in the process now, getting ready to update the handbook for 2020, and
Okay, so a question or two, and I'll invite Ms. Killian. You're joining us here as well. So, Office of Landlord Tenant Affairs, you receive about 800 calls a month. You said you are closing 60 cases.
we receive at least 60 cases each month, new cases.
And tell us, your function is partly to keep disputes out of the courts, to help tenants get resolution without having to escalate all the way to the point of needing a lawyer. Is that right?
Yes. And we mediate most disputes. We actually settle around 97% of our cases. If we can't mediate them, we forward them to the Commission on Landlord Tenant Affairs
Right.
for adjudication so that they don't have to go to court, to small claims court. And a lot of times, once it gets to the commission level and the commission accepts jurisdiction, they settle before they actually get to hearing.
Okay.
So
They don't even have to go to hearing.
we continue to mediate all the way up to the point that they hear it. Once they hear it,
This is
we're
a
out.
really important point. When we were doing the landlord-tenant bill, and subsequently and previous to it, there's often discussion about how can we move in essentially a more litigious manner. How can the county get more involved in lawsuits or support more lawsuits? How can we create essentially help support legal representation, other things that are not understanding that our first goal is to give you a solution that doesn't require you to go to court, that allows you to resolve an issue without a lawyer, without all of those processes and costs and expenses. And
That's still our mission.
That's your mission. And so
We want you to know all your rights and everything, and we do emphasize trying to make sure tenants are well informed, that they know what their rights are.
I don't know how many jurisdictions have this kind of approach, but I can certainly imagine that there are some jurisdictions where you have your legal rights, and if your employer, if the building owner is violating code, then the city might take action, but otherwise the tenant is up to themselves to pursue something in court, which is a pretty high hurdle. So, okay, and Ms. Killian, you're here. So why don't we invite the groups up? We've got Director Spann, Stacy Spann from the HOC. Can we have Matt Losak, Anna Martinez, Rob Goldman?
Roberts is also here. He's the chair of the board, I think.
Right. Mr. Spann, do you want to just come down to this?
Why don't you pull out the blue one?
Musical chairs.
Use the.
There we go. You did that better than I would have.
It's coordination.
Yeah.
There you go.
Right, exactly. Things fall into place. Okay. So why don't we start with the department? Director Getzer, can you talk us about the vision of the department's support for tenant organizations?
Sure, I think it's important to kind of get an entire encapsulation of what the department does before we talk about the actual tenant services. And so there's three main components, things that we do to help support the rental community. Of course, there's preserving and producing affordable housing at different income levels. There's code enforcement, and then there's tenant rights. And we have done all of those in a very proficient fashion this year. In fact, we'll be closing about $100 million worth of affordable housing loans this fiscal year. Total development cost, if you add up all of those 22 projects, will be about $500 million, so $500 million, and that's going to, there's going to be 10 senior deals, 9 multifamily, 2 will be special needs projects, and 1 is a distressed communities project. We also won 2 NACO awards, 1 for using county-owned land, and the other was partnering with a faith-based organization. Much of the population that we serve, they're vulnerable. They don't have a lot of resources, and so if you don't have affordable housing to begin with, it doesn't really matter about the tenant services that you have because they're not going to have a place where they can live. So that's why I bring up affordable housing first. Second, code enforcement. And I think everybody here understands that we have made an effort to strengthen code enforcement. We went live with a new code enforcement website. We went live with the troubled property list, which we also won a NACO award this year on. We have a new app that is on your phone, which we won a NACO award on. And we are 1 property away of completing the multi-year surge in which we hit all of the multifamily buildings over a short period of time. It was about 2.5 years. There's just about 680 properties. All in all, we're looking at about 100 troubled properties. 230 will be at risk. 330 will be considered compliant. And from there, we will be inspecting 100% of the units for all of those troubled properties. And then those that are going to be at risk, we will be monitoring them every 2 years, and the compliant will fall back to the triennial inspection. It wasn't just about doing a whole lot of code enforcement. We also inspected a higher quantity of units. Normally it's about 15% of the units in a property. Sometimes it's 100, but on average it's 15. So in this surge we did 30% of the units, so 21,000 units. Over 21,000 units were inspected as a part of this effort. And again, it wasn't just about the inspections. We were also focusing on our customers. We were able to increase the rate in which we were meeting our service requests through the MC 311 service, and we got up to 94% this past quarter. And that's up from 80% historically. So we're looking at all of that.
94%.
94%. So we receive about 20 to 30,000 service request calls in through the MC 311 system. This past quarter, we received 4,000. Code enforcement had about 1,000, so 940 out of those 1,000 were successfully answered within that time frame, which compares relatively high to the rest of the county when we look at those marks. And so
That means an inspector went to the site most likely, or the question was answered if it was purely informational.
Exactly. And so now that we have the affordable housing and that we have the safe sanitary housing, now we can move into the tenant services. And so, of course, we have the landlord-tenant program, which receives 9,000 of those service requests. They're calls. And one thing that I want to note is that a lot of these calls are calls for information. I have an issue. I have a problem with. On average, we spend 15 minutes on those calls. That's like over 2,000 hours. That's an entire staff person in just calling and having one-on-one communication with residents. And I think that's really important because that's the thing that we're kind of striving for is more individual attention, more outreach. We have about 700 cases per year. We also work on eviction prevention. And since we know the law, because we have to execute it, we also have a relationship with the landlords, and that's very important. We can't just be going out there with sticks. We also have to have a relationship so that we can solve issues either informally or formally, but it's about being able to work with our partners. And of course, we have a number of our partners here today. We've done a lot with tenant rights. We have updated our policies and procedures. Of course, we have our new tenant advocate. We are working with data more than ever before. We are looking at properties that have very high rent increases, as well as the code troubled property list, landlord-tenant cases, and also eviction and RIP data to start mapping where are those locations, either neighborhoods or properties, so we can start getting out on the street and in those properties and in those areas more frequently, so we can be more proactive with our services. And of course, I'll drop it off to our partners, but we have a number of different partners and contracts that perform general outreach and public relations, tenant organizing, legal, community outreach, public safety, and of course, small landlord, technical, code enforcement, and financial assistance. And so that's what DHCA does in a snapshot in terms of our rental community with affordable housing, code enforcement, and landlord tenant.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you for that review.
Everyone go first.
I was thinking we would have everyone present, but
That's fine. That's
I
fine.
can be a little flexible if there was something you felt informational
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
really
yeah,
targeted
yeah,
to the
quick,
department.
quick,
Yeah,
quick,
go for it.
Hey, Tim, thank you for the presentation. It would be great if, I know you were reading handwritten notes there, but just all the numbers you spouted off, if we could get that to staff so we could have like a fact sheet on that, that would be helpful for me. I wrote down most, but I'd like to see it. So glad you're on board. Welcome to the, you said 100 troubled, how many at risk again?
230? No, wait up. Yeah, 230 at risk.
And then 330 compliant.
That's right.
And 100% of the units will be inspected that are troubled. What's the timeline for that?
We'll start July 1st.
And how long do you think?
It'll take a year.
1 year?
Yep.
Okay. And then the at-risk, you're going to do, what was the,
So 2 years. So at the same time that we're doing the troubled properties, we'll also be doing half of the at-risk, but we'll be doing a sample of those, a higher sample than normal.
okay, great. Yeah, and I'll pause for the rest, but I just wanted to clear it off and make sure we could get some of the numbers. But thank you for that. That was good.
Thank you.
Director Span.
Good morning. So for the record, my name is Stacy Span. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. Thanks for the opportunity to discuss the ways in which HOC works with its customers and residents to encourage resident engagement in commission activities. So just to level set, we do three things. And there are a variety of tools that we use to do these three things, but it really boils down to three things. It's getting people housed, keeping them housed, and helping them reach their fullest potential. And so in carrying out these priorities, we're really focusing on how our efforts can ensure that our customers have autonomy and that they can make their own choices and help keep their families stably housed and thriving. So this obviously means providing customers with outlets and access to the opportunity to advocate, as well as direct advocacy for the needs of their families and the broader community. So we value the resident engagement in decision making, and the primary vehicle for that is resident participation. For that resident participation is our resident advisory board. It's responsible for bringing resident voices to deliberations and decisions of the commission. I want to point out, though, that we are, as you all are well aware, we had 11 rental assistance administration transactions, and so
Which is each a building that is being
yes, so it is
renovated, right?
So well, it's a little more than that. What it means is those were formerly technically public housing properties. It's a Section 9 of the code, but essentially we have converted those, or are in the process of converting those, from technical public housing to a sort of a Section 8 platform. And so the pittance that the federal government gives us to operate and maintain those properties is converted into essentially a voucher.
Okay.
I bring that up because as part of the rental assistance administration effort, you're required to do 2 meetings with residents. we've conducted well over 100 meetings. And so we're not perfect by no stretch are we perfect, but and we take resident engagement seriously. We don't always get it right, but we take it seriously, and we try to provide the opportunity for folks to at least bubble up concerns, and where we can meet them at concern with solutions, we work hard to do that. So just quickly turning back to our Resident Advisory Board, it consists of residents from across the HOC's variety of housing programs. Generally, that's going to be in, as a rule, properties that HOC owns or administers those programs, and that would include the Housing Choice Voucher Program. And we have somewhere around 7,000 of those Housing Choice Vouchers, or even our Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. And in addition to that, HOC supportive housing programs, and we reserve a seat serving one of those residents, as you know, winds up being a commissioner. And so we have that direct link from the Resident Advisory Board to the Commission in all of its activities, including committees as well as the full Commission meetings. And so, like the other commissioners, that resident commissioner is appointed by the county executive and confirmed by the county council. Our current resident commissioner is Linda Kroom. She was appointed in 2016. Previously served as the Resident Advisory Board president for 8 years. So she has a direct understanding of the issues and inner working of both the Resident Advisory Board, the committee structure for the commission, as well as the overall committee. And so she's become, throughout that time, a trusting confidant of HOC customers. That Resident Advisory Board meets on a monthly basis, reviews virtually everything of significance related to HOC. So when we're embarking on a new initiative, we take it to the Resident Advisory Board, in addition to those communities that are directly affected by it. So we're offering the opportunity for customers, residents to participate, but also give direct feedback in HOC practices and procedures, as well as implementing any of our policies or changing policies that are coming from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Excuse me. So the president of the RAB also provides a report to the commissioners on Resident Advisory Board activities at every monthly commission meeting. It offers a regular opportunity for engagement directly from the Resident Advisory Board to the commissioners. And whatever information they're bringing is their own. And I think at least most of you know this, we have a portion on our monthly agenda every single month, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how animated, that's reserved specifically for community feedback. Sometimes that's our customers. Other times it's folks who are at odds with what we're doing, or at least what they think we're doing. And so we continue to provide that even when it's inconvenient. And then we really have worked hard whenever there's something of significance, any sort of change, to go directly into that impacted community and have an HOC forum or a series of forum. A great example of that is our last year acquisition of Cider Mill. And it immediately raised the need for direct engagement. Folks were concerned about the impact of new ownership, how that would not only impact their families, but the broader community. And so, the team led by our chief operating officer, Shauna Sorrells, was out there every single month, directly meeting with folks to make sure that we communicated what we were doing, but also took stock of what they felt was necessary. And we thought it was successful. It has been helpful, and I think it really helped integrate us into that community a little bit better. So acknowledging the importance of resident engagement and voices during that transition, the acquisition of Cider Mill was helpful, not just because we were taking some steps that weren't readily evident to folks in terms of changing management, making sure we addressed certain physical and capital needs on the property, but really the timeliness of it and how soon were we going to be able to turn that around. There, as in every community, there are some challenges that just are unseen at the point of acquisition, and I think those meetings were successful in helping us understand it better and really meet folks at the need. Moreover, we've got several other properties that are in the middle of development. We've had Arcola Towers recently and Waverly House, but now we've got Bower Park, and we engage with those communities regularly, but those Arcola Towers and Bower Park in particular have formed independent resident associations, and they focus on resident activities as well as issues at their respective locations. And per Resident Advisory Board bylaws, the RAB itself helped to establish and supports those organizations, encourages resident participation, engages with the associations, and ensures that issues are communicated to HOC, the entire team and commission when appropriate. So beyond those organized meetings, we also know that there are customers who just need immediate attention and sometimes regular attention. And so we've created some new positions that are helpful in that. 2 years ago, we launched our customer relationship management effort and call center. That's a direct response to customer concerns. The call center is our first line when fielding customer issues and inquiries. Our team uses the customer relationship management system to document and track any customer issues and the histories as well, so that we're ensuring that folks are heard, that we've provided information, we've worked where feasible to resolve issues, and also to directly connect folks to program staff when they require additional assistance. And then we've added a resident ombudsman to our property management team as well. In that position, that person will be responsible for tracking and shepherding customer issues across all of HOC's properties. We own somewhere around 8,000 units at this time, and so they're ensuring that residents are able to navigate the resources available to them and keep them connected to the housing, but also the broader community. So with that, I'll thank you and welcome any questions.
Terrific. I think we're going to keep moving through the presentations, and then we'll come back for discussion.
Good morning. My name is Robert Goldman, for the record, and I'm president of Montgomery Housing Partnership. And I appreciate the opportunity to brief the committee on the work our organization does to support tenants in the county. I think many of you know, but MHP is a nonprofit housing development organization, and we're celebrating this year our 30-year anniversary. All right. Our mission is to develop quality, affordable housing, and we've developed close to 2,000 units throughout the county. MHP takes sort of a comprehensive approach to developing affordable housing. So it's not just about housing people, but it's also about empowering the residents that live on our properties through what we call community life programs, and also through strengthening neighborhoods around where affordable housing is located, and that's through some various revitalization and community development activities. Through our work in Long Branch over 18 years ago, we realized pretty quickly that community has a large number of smaller apartment buildings that are owned oftentimes by mom and pop owners. And we realized that while we could buy and renovate, and we were buying and renovating some of the worst of the properties, that we could only do so much. And so what we really felt was that there was a need to provide sort of technical assistance to these mom and pop owners and to encourage them to and help them to improve their properties. And we felt that was maybe the best way to improve the quality of housing in the Long Branch community. And we felt that there were some other communities, and so we broadened that beyond just Long Branch. And this led through eventually to a contract with the Department of Housing and Community Affairs, allowing us to manage a program what's called the Apartment Assistance Program. And the AAP program provides assistance to small landlords in the county that own or manage anywhere from about 1 to 50 units. We've managed this program, started in 2000, and we went to about 2010. The program was stopped during the downturn of the economy and then started back up in FY18. So we've been back up and running for about over a year now. The primary mission of AAP is to help small apartment owners increase the quality, safety, and sustainability of their rental properties, but it also plays a role in educating landlords on the rights of tenants. This Thursday, for example, we'll be holding a seminar for landlords on fair housing laws. Earlier this year, we held seminars on reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities, as well as one on how to navigate difficult conversations and complaints with tenants. We've also done a lot with the stepped-up code enforcement on just how that process works and how and give them as much information, and brought DHCA representatives there to share as much information with them as possible. Over the course of the year, we hope to do more work around eviction prevention through educating landlords on assistance programs that their tenants may be eligible for, and by encouraging landlords to negotiate with tenants before going down the path of eviction. Since the program relaunched last April, we've held nearly 10 seminars for landlords on a variety of different topics. These seminars provide an opportunity for owners and managers to develop relationships with other property owners and to learn about issues that are key to effective property management. The seminars and other services that AAP provides are offered free of charge to owners and managers. Beyond our seminars, the AAP provides landlords with access to comprehensive technical assistance. Owners or managers can call our specialists for advice on anything from potential rehab projects to county rules and regulations. Some of the most common inquiries we receive include landlord-tenant issues, guidance on applying for a DHCA loan or grant, and landlords seeking information about qualified contractors. Over the last few weeks, our AAP specialist has been actively reaching out to properties that are on the county's troubled properties list to extend an offer of assistance to the landlords and to make them aware of resources that are available to help them improve the condition of their property. The county also has a low-interest loan program available to small rental properties to encourage the rehab of substandard rental properties, and we help to promote this program and provide assistance to applicants in preparing their applications to DHCA. Also, in addition to the AAP program, as a landlord ourselves, our management company has regular meetings with our tenants. We also have what we call asset managers, or sort of the liaison between management company and tenant. So if a tenant just is frustrated by not getting a response from the landlord, they can reach out to our asset managers and they can help to facilitate the conversation and get things resolved. We also actively support our residents' right to organize. If there is a desire and interest among our residents to form a tenants association, we help to organize the residents and provide logistical support and meeting space to give our residents a forum to express their concerns to us, as well as the property management company, which oversees the day-to-day management of the property. To facilitate tenants organizing, we have a dedicated staff person that assists us with maintaining good relations with our residents and supporting the resident associations. Earlier this year, our community engagement specialist helped residents at our Glenville Road properties in the Long Branch community form a resident association, and the group has already made progress in addressing neighborhood concerns. In our experience, when residents are engaged in a resident association, the whole community functions better. Be honest, though, we also find that, given how busy our residents are and working two jobs or more, they aren't always as active as maybe we would like in these programs. But what we do find is our residents are most responsive to our what we call our community life programs. We provide a wide array of programs for our residents. For the kids, we have preschool programs. We have after-school program for elementary school kids, as well as just started a middle school program. And then for adults, we have computer classes, ESOL classes, health promotion activities. And all these classes and programs are meant to provide greater opportunities for our residents to succeed. So I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you very much. Goldman. All right. Ana Martinez.
Good morning. My name is Ana Martinez. I'm the lead organizer for Montgomery County for CASA, which is the largest immigrant rights organization in the Middle Atlantic region. CASA provides various services, including worker centers, citizenship clinic, English classes, legal services, health services to support immigrant and low-income workers and to enable them to become strong advocates for their own interest. And soon we will be starting our new robust census program. We're grateful for the last 10 years that the county has supported our tenant advocacy programs, which has allowed us to provide low-income immigrants and African American communities with ongoing training and support to improve housing conditions. As renters continue to grow in Montgomery County, currently 35.3% of households, it is important that we continue supporting our residents. I oversee the tenant organizing program in Montgomery County, which includes Germantown, Gaithersburg, Aspen Hill, Wheaton, and Silver Spring. Our program consists of 4 organizers, including myself, and 1 staff attorney from a legal department. Most of our team members are bilingual to ensure that we can support multicultural families, as well as provide translation between tenants to increase understanding and communication between cultures. We provide legal counseling and know your rights education to protect tenants' rights, build tenant association, and identify new tenant leaders who will join the effort to advocate for improved housing conditions. We also have a policy department that works on advocacy issues related to tenants' rights. CASA partnered with the County Council, DHCA, the Renters Alliance, and other organizations and individuals to pass Bill 1915 to increase code enforcement and tenant protection. Since then, we have continued to educate tenants on this legislation to ensure it's enforced, as well as supporting other bills such as just cause renters eviction. Our team provides door-to-door outreach through the county to invite tenants to community meetings and connect them to resources. In addition to larger community meetings focused on tenants' issues and attended by representatives of DHCA and other county and community organizations, we also organize house meetings to make it easier to build trust within community members. As an immigrant rights organization, we know that people who live in fear because they're immigrants can also be subject to mistreatment as tenants. In addition to responding to their needs as tenants, we're able to connect renters to other services such as health, insurance, and immigration counseling, which can make a significant difference in their life. We have 4 tenant associations that we work on with the current contract with the county: University Landing, University Minor, Aspen Hill, and Gaithersburg Villas, as well as 2 that have emerged out of emergencies, including Flower Branch and Middlebrook Mobile Homes. CASA was one of the first community-based organizations to respond with support for the victims of the Flower Branch explosion. Since then, we have worked with the tenants to change the property manager, which improved the treatment of residents across several complexes. We continue to help Flower Branch residents to raise their other concerns, including gas leaks, pest infestation, rent increases, and other housing conditions. We are also helped organize community design meetings to ensure there will be a memorial on the premise to remember the community members who died as a result of the explosion. Recently, the county executive and county council member Jawando, Reamer, Hucker, and Albornoz joined the Tenant Association and CASA to demand Washington Gas to fully implement NTSB report, which identified errors made by Washington Gas in case management that led to the deaths of 7 renters and injuries to 65 others. We have other success, including improving safety throughout the county. In University Landing, we work closely with the Tenant Association and the property management team to reduce pest infestation, improve housing conditions, and to arrange for a police officer to live on the premise to improve safety for residents. We also work with the City of Gaithersburg and the Police Department to improve lighting in unsafe areas in the Gaithersburg Villas apartment. In the last year, we worked closely with the Middlebrook Mobile Homes in Germantown, which is another vulnerable population that has been subjected to mistreatment by management company. In this community, we have developed a strong tenant association and I have worked with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs to investigate water bills that range between $35 to $1,000. This community needs a lot of support, and we plan to continue working there to address the many issues they face to management, neglect, and mistreatment. In Long Branch, we have been working through the Fair Development Coalition to ensure that low-income renters are now illegally or unfairly displaced as rent rise is anticipated in the Purple Line. These are just a few examples of our work. We know that we need to continue to support our tenants, since many of them fear retaliation by property managers who engage in bad practices. Building on our history of bringing tenants from different complexes and associations together in broad community meetings, we plan to host the first Montgomery County Tenant Leadership Council meeting this summer so the tenant association leaders can learn from each other. To me, tenant organizing is essential because so many people suffer in silence, too scared to speak up because they have been mistreated as if they don't matter. Residents who live in older buildings see rent increases year after year while housing conditions remain the same. My goal is that the tenants have the tools to advocate and stand up for themselves and their community while at the same time making sure we put a stop to abusive property managers. Thank you for your support and commitment to improving housing conditions for all Montgomery County residents.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your explanation of your great work. All right, Renters Alliance.
Alrighty, we will bring it on home.
Okay.
And I won't read my full statement because I know we definitely want to get to the discussion. So good morning. First of all, I'm Will Roberts, the new chair of the Renters Alliance Board of Directors. I'm joined by Matt Losak, our executive director, who runs our day-to-day, and Justin Chappell, fellow board member. We're really excited to be here, be part of this conversation on tenant issues and the services that the county and our partners are providing. Also give a shout out really quickly to Rosie McCray Moody. I was a member of her Commission on Land and Tenant Affairs years ago, and they do great work. So plus to Rosie. So just, really briefly, as you all know, the Renters Alliance has been around for nearly a decade. We'll be celebrating our 10-year anniversary next year, in fact. And we were born very much out of the work done around the tenants work group in the county, where folks were demanding and organized votes for renters and tenant advocacy. And so we are really the first and only regional nonprofit exclusively dedicated to renter outreach, education, organizing, and advocacy. And I'll just give you some quick facts. Certainly, you heard from folks up here. Our population in the county is nearly 40% tenant now and 40% renter. And folks are facing increased challenges, as you all know, which is why it's refreshing, that this council and this committee, I think, has been really trying to focus and prioritize on renter issues. So we thank you for that, number one. But we have been, as was mentioned, parts of a broad coalition in support of Bill 1915, which is to expand renters' rights and certainly access to information for renters to be able to know their rights and advocate for themselves. We've been responsible for about 8 to 12 property organizations. I should say that right. So basically, every year we organize and interface with about 8 to 12 properties around the county, and that interfacing and organizing looks different in each property. Some properties are return visits for us for properties that have sort of persistent problems. We are really involved in our day-to-day is helping to prevent evictions, helping to work with tenants in the county to resolve code enforcement issues, complaints, interfacing with property management, with the Office of Landlord and Tenant Affairs, and with other entities around the county. And we do this not just the three of us, but the Renters Alliance is really a coalition of over 30 organizations that are nonprofit, civic, labor, religious, that have come together along with a network of other tenant associations, all sort of pushing toward the same goal of making sure that, again, tenants are organized, educated, and advocated for and can advocate for themselves. We've also worked around the county to help organize tenants associations in over 30 properties and work alongside a statewide coalition of about 25 organizations. And this work is done countywide, and we hope to continue to expand that. We've been doing that in all corners of the county. And I think one of the last things I'll say, I think, over the 10 years, you heard, I think, properly our conversation start off with DHCA touting some really great awards that they've gotten, and we're very proud of them, and proud of the work that the Renters Alliance has done to help the county shine in a statewide and national spotlight on these issues. So We are excited to talk to you all today and have a robust conversation about what's going on in the county and the need for really robust funding and support for organizations like ours that do that work.
Perfect.
I'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you. That was really helpful to get your presentation and each of the groups presented and the department and HOC. I think we wanted to just first have a big picture conversation about the work that the county does to support tenant organizing and the importance of tenant organizing. I always think back to a discussion we had when we were doing the legislation, Bill 1915, which was about tenant rights and code enforcement. And one of the key points that really settled in my mind was that government is a huge part of the solution here. You know, the code inspection is an essential protection, but at the end of the day, government can't solve this problem. It can't address all the issues. It needs a strong civic infrastructure, community building, and advocacy from the tenants themselves. And government is fundamentally a little bit more responsive than it is able to kind of initiate and bring from the grassroots up. And so we need to have a very strong grassroots structure in the county, a civic structure for tenants. And that was for me, that was really kind of just a breakthrough in terms of understanding how this whole thing works. And that's why we need to support tenant organizations and why we need to ensure that we're doing a better job, because it's fundamental to the quality of housing that people have and their ability to achieve their potential, as Director Spann puts it. So that, I think is the fundamental justification for providing the support to the organizations. I did want to note that last week I met with the Latino Economic Development Corporation, and I was learning from them about some of their work around tenant issues in D.C., and I found out that they have a very, very strong program in D.C., and they've been there for years building and building. They do a lot of work around TOPA, which is a big issue in D.C. Hasn't been much of an issue here, I think, generally speaking. But so there are even another organization that is a strong Montgomery County organization does provide services in this area, but is not part of our funding mix. So I think that kind of highlights the opportunity to assess the landscape of groups and figure out, are we funding everybody we want to fund? Are we funding as broadly as we want to fund? That I think was kind of driving part of the conversation here. So why don't I go to my colleagues for some questions, and then we'll continue this dialogue. Mr. Duando.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for all the information. Happy anniversary, 10th and 30th. Those are big years, so congratulations. A couple questions. Let me start with DHCA. So great partners here, all the work you're doing. You're going to get that great fact sheet just to remind you about that. And so give me a sense of the universe, the scale of the problem, right? We have a lot of renters, right? We have a lot of low-income renters and folks that are rent burdened. And, I know later we're going to talk about the contract for services and all that, but I want to get a vision of the forest in your view of between the work, you've got a great new tenant advocate on board. Do we have what we need in the toolkit or the cupboard, however you want it, to address the full range of tenants that we have now and that we suspect to have in the future? And that's around responding to calls. I think you said 80,000, what is it? Certain number of calls a year and a month. There to 61 complaints, but 821 per month. And that's just what's coming in. There's obviously proactive, to Councilmember Reamer's point, there's a reactive and a proactive way to do this. And the proactive way means we got to get into communities. So give me a sense of the scale. Do we have what we need with our partners? Do you see the money that DHCA and that we appropriated that is going to go towards this among the work you're doing as enough? What do you see as the long-term plan and vision? Hopefully that was a clear question.
Yes, it was. Thank you. Yes, we receive about 20,000 to 30,000 service requests, about 10,000 to code enforcement, 10,000 to 9,000 or 10,000 to landlord-tenant calls. In terms of our resources and our partnerships, our partners have never been stronger. And in terms of what we have right now, in terms of resources, like I said before, I think it's a start. I think what we started doing with Bill 1915, the Tenant Rights Bill, it put the focus on code enforcement. And you've seen what we've been able to do with increased resources with code enforcement. It is more data-driven than ever before, and that is how we are approaching the issues with tenant rights. Sat at this table regarding evictions and writs and those issues. We'll be talking about rental subsidies later this summer. And we have more data than ever before. But I think what we need to do is be down on the ground more often and really pinpoint our resources. We can do that with data, but at some point, you're going to need a little bit more in order to do more. And so, again, I think that we have a very good start. I think that the information that we're having and the data that we'll be using will make the argument of additional need for resources.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think of a bill I'm introducing next week to require, if you're have to move out of your property because of health or safety reasons, that your rental expenses or that your moving expenses be paid for by the landlord, which is currently not required. We're going to be introducing that. That came out of the fact that we did all these code enforcements, and you had some people that had to leave because of health and safety. So it was because we were doing the other things, because we had the grassroots outreach, we're going to identify more gaps that either are policy concerns or are things that the community that you work with has to step up and help and organize. So I agree with you 100%. So actually doing this will get us to the place to understand the full scope of the problem. So I'm glad that you're taking that view of it. Could you talk a little bit about, and anyone can answer this, and this will be my last question for now, is the cultural competency piece of the work, in that many of the communities that we're engaging with, English might be a second language. There may be concerns about just working with people in authority in general. There's a whole myriad of concerns. How are you all each addressing that component, and how do you bake that into what you do?
I'll let my partners take a shot at that, but before they do, I think that's a very good point. Some folks, they don't want to work through the government because they have certain views of it, and so we need partners and folks that they can relate better to. That's just a fact of life. We do have a very diverse organization, but we need to rely on our partners. And Mr. Reamer, you brought up LEDC. There's also an organization, HIP, and I think that you... HIP, I think it's Housing Initiatives Partnership. Yep. Okay. And both of those provide different types of financial literacy. We've used them, and we use them as a part of our home ownership initiative. And we've done that with the state of Maryland, matching a contract for a number of years. It originally was with the foreclosure program, and now it's more aimed at home ownership and kind of gearing towards it. But I think that there is, as we are identifying gaps, I think that there's a gap in financial literacy in terms of rental properties and kind of being able to provide that type of assistance to tenants.
What do you mean?
Well, so in terms of, say, eviction prevention, how do we get there? Sometimes we'll get a call in the 11th hour in which the eviction may be scheduled the next day. Well, that makes it so we can't do a whole lot. We'll go out guns blazing and try to rectify the situation, but if we knew about it 30 days ago, if there was different help, and if we received information on that writ before, a while ago, we could have provided some assistance, some different financial literacy assistance to those communities, to that specific person, to try to avoid that situation altogether. And that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about more proactive, almost avoidance of those types of negative issues.
I'll chime in also, and thank you, Tim, for raising that. About cultural competency, not only do we see a gap between those who are not or new to American culture, that is, immigrants or people who speak foreign languages. But that gap between renters and the government and how they can access those resources is still very wide. We go to properties across the economic and cultural spectrum. There isn't we like to think that there's the Long Branch community and everybody else, but there's not. If you go to an apartment complex in Bethesda, that's a well-to-do complex, they're well-to-do, but the people in that complex are multicultural. We see people from every walk of life. What they have in common across the spectrum is a lack of knowledge of how the complaint process works, what their rights are, how to negotiate with their landlords, and a general fear of speaking up because they can be evicted without cause. So we're seeing that, in terms of a cultural competency, that what Mr. Getzinger is pointing out is that there's a huge area of penetration that we haven't gotten to yet. You talked about the forest. We should keep in mind that there are at least 455 properties in Montgomery County with 6 or more units. There are 233 properties in Montgomery County with 6 or less units. And Stephanie can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's the figure. The senior population in Montgomery County is going to explode over the next few years. National statistics of seniors in rental housing have quadrupled since 2009, from 0.4 million to over 2 million. And that is also reflected in Montgomery County. That's going to see, according to the Commission on Aging, around 250,000 more seniors over the next several years, and the majority of them are going to live in rental housing. So this issue is becoming extremely critical in terms of overall public policy interest.
Want to comment on that?
I think that we try to see various issues that are impacting our tenants. So it could be their income coming in. It could be as well as where they're from, their cultural, and that influences how they're mistreated. And as I mentioned before, so for example, we have a complex in the mobile homes in Germantown where the manager refuses to speak Spanish to the residents, even though she speaks Spanish. So there's a lot of issues that make the situation worse. So I think it's really important to see folks as a person and also see how race and gender and so many other issues impact tenants, and how other services that we can provide them. So if that means providing them English classes, or if that means connecting them to social services to help with this health aspect of it, or connecting them with other services that can help them as a whole.
Do all of you do that? Like I think that's a great kind of holistic approach, but if you find other needs as you're addressing the rental challenges, do you refer them to other services and needs? Stacey? Yeah.
So just, yes, we work hard at it, but I'll point out that Director Getzinger rightly notes that if you're finding out at the 11th hour, it's really impossible to throw the entire arsenal of tools at it. So do we try? Yes. And I earlier talked about our rental assistance demonstration effort. And what we did there is, and even our town halls, we try to assess the community with whom we're talking and provide resources in as many languages as are spoken there. And that sometimes is incredibly difficult because you pointed it out, some of our senior communities are extremely diverse. And so there are a number of things at play, but we certainly try to adapt to the situation, provide resources. Again, we don't get it perfect, but we've made a great deal of progress. I think we've made that progress in part because the HOC has become intentional about addressing directly with our team issues, and mostly management team, because that's where it's coming from. Issues around race, equity, and inclusion. And until we are willing to have those direct, unpleasant conversations and how we as an agency are showing up in communities, we're likely not to make as much progress as we want.
I just want to add that we are part of the Race Equity Working Group out of Tacoma Park, but that one of the things that we certainly refer tenants to every service that we think that they need. But one of the things as a board we've determined that is most helpful is to concentrate our efforts strictly on our mission. We certainly don't have the capacity to do the kinds of social work that's required in many of the situations that we run into. So we streamline our activity strictly to deal with the landlord-tenant issue, with the renters' rights issue, with the process through the state or through landlord-tenant, to secure their home, to secure the affordability of their home, and to support policies that do that. And yet, it is true that we, in our work, run into far greater problems than just that. But because of our limited resources, and also because of the need to focus just on that, that's where we put our efforts. I think you wanted to add.
Good morning. My name is Justin Chappell. I've been on the board of the Montgomery County Renters Alliance for the past 5 years. However, I've also worked with the Renters Alliance throughout the past 10 years, both in my professional capacity as a case manager for low-income families here in Montgomery County, as well as being the president of a neighborhood association in South Silver Spring, which has 10,000 renters and, like the rest of the county, is growing. And so what I've seen is the power, when you talk about cultural competency, of the fact that the Renters Alliance is for renters, by renters, and that there's a direct connection when people come to us where they feel like they haven't been heard and they haven't had any other people be able to address their problems. We're able to work with them as equals and talk with them about what their concerns are and make sure that, we can talk to them about how we can relate to their concerns and then work with them to build a plan to address their concerns. And, whether it be direct issues of rent or eviction or the broader, more holistic issues that they're dealing with that address, economic self-sufficiency.
Thank you.
Let me just chime in here too. I mean, just to kind of further what Stacy and Matt were talking about, we see our community life staff that's on the ground working with residents all the time. They get, there are a number of sort of social issues that come up, and that's really not what they're there for. And so we sort of do what we can to kind of refer people. But I think there is a need for, I think on the federal government for maybe some public housing and Section 8 have some resident counselor funding, but at the county level we really don't. And to really provide some kind of referrals to different county services and to support residents, again, so you can kind of do some, whether it's, with those things dealt with, that, you can sort of prevent evictions and prevent situations from happening. And so that, I think that's a struggle we kind of deal with, and we've sort of debated how to kind of fund a position like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I struggle with too, is that we've heard prevention several times, and a lot of times it's the other things that are happening that are contributing to not always, you could have landlords jack the rent up, and we've seen that, but a lot of times it's other problems that are happening that are leading to the issue of the housing. So it's kind of, they're interwoven, and we have to figure out how best to support that work. So I appreciate the discussion and defer to my colleague.
No, just going back to the fact of people's identities, I think it's important because sometimes there's different obstacles that add on. For example, people that are undocumented, they're scared to talk to government officials, or they're scared to talk to their property managers because they're scared that immigration could come in. So before we talk about, before we get to the point where they feel comfortable talking to a manager or someone else, we got to talk about the aspect of immigration and that they feel comfortable with when it comes to their rights. There's also other obstacles that come up when it comes to literacy rate, that maybe someone doesn't know how to read or write, so we can't ask them to do like a structural minutes or things like that, where we have to change the dynamic. Or changing the format, having in people's homes where they feel comfortable, where we can talk about, get to know each other, where we can talk about culture, where we can get to know each other as neighbors and as people before we go to talking about business. So I think that those are aspects that are important, as well as when we're talking about police officers living on premise. There's a lot of fear when it comes to police officers. So before we even have a police officer there to talk about safety, we got to talk about all the fears that comes around and all the fear that comes when it comes to discrimination and talk about that obstacle before we even get to that situation.
Can I just add something also with an example? And I agree there are lots of problems throughout the county, particularly with lower income and immigrant communities. And I hope that the county will support all of the organizations that are doing that work, and for that matter, institute county resources directly. But for example, when we worked in Northwest Park with another organization under Catholic Charities and a coalition of partners, including CASA and others, the issues of Northwest Park were across the spectrum. Of course, this was lower income. Many of them were immigrant. And there was an emphasis on community empowerment. And of course, we support community empowerment in all its many aspects. But the issues that the tenants brought to the table that were most pressing had to do with the quality the heart of their security and their safety and their quality of life. So what concerns the Renters Alliance, and we put in our letter to you, is that we would not like to see the effort of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee to address everything and dilute the primary interest of stable, quality, affordable rental housing. And there is always a risk in wanting to do good and diluting the fundamental.
Thank you. I think we're going to talk in a minute about the potential for a request of scope of services. So I think I think we need more thinking about what it is that we are trying to achieve, and we need to hear from groups what their strengths are in this process. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, and glad we're having this discussion. I think this is a really helpful discussion for me to really understand what we're doing, and I think this is, helpful to what we had talked about before of really understanding the broad context of what we're talking about here, because too often I think we get one item at a time and one individual tree, and we don't really have a contextual discussion about the forest in which the tree is living and how that tree interacts with others. And so I think it's really helpful to have that conversation. And I think specifically about renters' rights, as noted by several of you, the numbers are growing, 23% to 35+%, and escalating, probably going to get near 40% in the next several years, not just an aging adult population, but a worker population, an increasingly urban environment, increasing focus on the livable, walkable, accessible communities, which, by and large, because of cost in those communities, if we can't go out any further, we have to go up. And those buildings that are going up oftentimes are rental buildings, because condos, particularly in our community, are extraordinarily expensive, particularly in desirable transit accessible communities. So I think it's really important, and to the conversation we had broadly about some of the eviction work that you all do in DHCA, Mr. Getzinger. I appreciate Rose on my team has been able to reach out. We've been able to intervene in an emergency situation on a couple of occasions just in the few months that I've been in office, and appreciate the work that you and your team have been able to do to help and support that work and all the efforts that you've put in. I just wanted to, as we talk about this context, if we could dig in a little bit to the specifics of, we talked about the numbers of how many properties we're talking about, how many calls we are dealing with on the department level. Do we have a number of how much are we spending in total output for department side and outside organization partnerships related to tenant advocacy. Do we have a number related to that?
I have not added it up, but I can certainly get that to you right away.
Yeah, I think when you do the fact sheet, I think that'd be helpful. I think, it tells two stories. One is I think we ought to know what we're spending in taxpayer dollars. Two, I think it's going to tell a story of a real increase in spending, and I think, that could tell two stories. One is we're increasing it. Is that good or bad? And certainly people will have their opinions on that. But two is that, you invest money in the public sector based on what you care about, and this is something that we are investing money in. I think that'd be helpful if we're having this broad context. I'm a follow the money guy and tell me what the numbers are, and so let's add a dollar amount to what we're doing. And I think it'd be helpful if we could break it down and figure out how much are we spending in the department, how much are we spending with outside partnerships and leveraging the work that the department's doing in the context of this conversation. But I think just talking about how much are we, the few $100,000s that we're looking at putting into outside organizational partnerships doesn't tell the full story of the partnerships with HOC that may or may not be included directly in that the new position that we've created, which I appreciate and welcome aboard, and thank you for your work and all the other efforts that are happening within the department that I know you all have taken considerable effort to this. The council has supported this. I know the county executive really cares about these issues. I think that would be helpful. And then I think within the grants or any of the outside funding, if you could break that down between competitive and non-competitive. Because one of the interesting conversations that we're going to talk about in a minute is that question of how do we make these decisions, and some of the organizations here have competitive grants, some of them have non-competitive grants, some of them have both, at least what it appears to me, and it's still, the aspect of this that I still don't understand is how we make these decisions. How do we decide how much money we're going to spend? Does the idea of a program or these outside services or these partnerships or these proposals that come from the outside organizations, they come from the department, or do they sometimes come from one and sometimes come from the other? I don't know if you have that answer now or if that could be part of the information that you provide later.
It is a mix. It'll be both from the organizations and also the demand from the department. If I'm not mistaken, if we take a look at Section G from the budget resolution, aren't all of those contracts considered non-competitive?
Those are all non-competitive.
Those are all non-competitive.
But for example, as you noted, like the Renters Alliance current contract is competitive.
The 70,000. Yeah, exactly. So I understand if we go to Section G, all of those will be non-competitive. Normally, we deal with these in those buckets. So we deal with the Section Gs at one point, and then we deal with a competitive grant process in another part. What I'm trying to say is let's take this broad topic, figure out all of the money that we are investing of taxpayer dollars, and say, okay, how much money are we investing? How do we break down that money? How much is it competitive? How much of it is non-competitive? How much is being invested in government resources and government staff and government programs? How much is being invested in outside resources and outside programs and perhaps outside staff? I don't know if any of the funding for competitive or non-competitive grants are spent on staffing for outside organizations. I know the CASA number, we talked about staffing. There's, it sounded like 4 organizers, 1 manager. And I don't know if, are we funding staff or are we funding programs and outreach? And I'm not sure. And is there a breakdown between competitive and non-competitive, which one we fund in which way, or it just depends on the different proposal?
I can certainly provide to you with the specifics at a later time, but nearly every contract that you have is going to have an element of staffing costs as well as costs for operational support for actually providing the services.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. All right, well, why don't we well, actually, I want a few more questions. Tell me what's involved in creating a tenant association. Like, let's say, DHCA has identified a need to create some tenant associations at troubled properties. So I'd like to hear from each of you, And I would ask if HOC and MHP can just participate insofar as this is relevant within your existing mission, like you have tenant advisory associations, you said, for some of your individual properties, not just the, so talk to me about what it takes to go from a property without an association to one that has one.
Let me chime in.
All right, why don't we start this way and we'll come back this way.
Right. First, I think that this is a discussion we've had ongoing with the DHCA for a while, because it's worth noting that tenants associations vary. Our process, from the Renters Alliance standpoint, is very fundamental. We go into a building, we go door to door, we provide, first we set up a meeting place, and by the way, Bill 1915 allows for us to have a free meeting space once a month at properties. That did not exist before. It used to be that tenants had to actually pay to utilize the community space at whatever it would have cost to have a wedding or a bar mitzvah in the same space. So it made it very difficult for tenants to organize. But with that passage of that legislation, we go door to door. We invite tenants to a community meeting. We include landlord, tenant, other organizations that might have relationships in that property. And we provide them with information about how to set up a tenants association. But that said, and that process allows us to educate tenants about rights and responsibilities, about the complaint process, and about what's going on. We encourage then a tenants association. But that's going to vary greatly depending on the building, the community, and what's going on there. In senior buildings where people are mostly retired, you're going to have the ability of seniors to be active and participate in tenants associations. In buildings where people are working 2 and 3 jobs and have children, it's very difficult to sustain a structural tenants association with officers, bylaws, a treasury, and regular meetings. However, some of those buildings which have terrible problems going on, that those needs will spur a tenants association. So we have 4 levels. The A level, which is a fully fledged tenants association with officers, bylaws, treasury, regular scheduled meeting. The B level is that we have officers, we might have a treasury, but we don't have bylaws and we don't have the infrastructure of a full-fledged tenants association. The third one is we would have tenants who are active and interested in being involved in the issues of their community, but aren't necessarily officers, but are kind of a self-appointed committee, and they're active. And then the fourth level is tenants who come together, who are seeking our assistance, who are interested in forming a tenants association, but either don't have the wherewithal or the appetite for it at this time. But all of those 4 levels change over time. Fully fledged tenants associations may weaken. Weakened tenants associations may strengthen, depending on the issues that are going on in the building, the movement of the population, and so on. We have some tenants associations in Montgomery County which are extremely strong, with hundreds of members, full-fledged bylaws, and very serious activities that we're very proud of, that we've helped to strengthen. So I don't want the PHED committee to perceive the strength of the activity depending on the level of the tenants association, but actually the value has to do with simply going out to the property, reaching out to the community, providing them this information, and going back repeatedly.
Thank you.
For us, the first beginning is making sure that we do outreach. So we do outreach throughout more than the complex, as I mentioned, and then having the community meetings, making sure that we invite folks and engaging them and making sure that they know their rights, as well as we have our legal counsel sometimes joins the meetings and provides legal information, as well as does counsel on the side. So I think that's the beginning of the step. The other aspect is starting to helping develop that aspect of it, creating the leadership component, creating the bylaws, understanding what the different positions are, and then trying to build that relationship with the management company. A lot of the management companies that we work with tend to be a little bit more resistant of like folks being engaged. So then we have to start creating those conversations on bigger issues. Like as I mentioned, for example, Middlebrook Mobile Homes, the manager doesn't want to meet with us, even though the residents have already created a demand letter and really are pretty more insistent. So we work in complexes sometimes that it's a little bit that our managers are more on edge. For example, we even had in Aspen Hill, we had a manager show up a meeting and kind of scared a little bit of the tenants. So we have a little bit of obstacles But that's what we're working on, is making sure first that people lose their fear and helping them individually. A lot of times people receive fees that are unfair. For example, in villas right now, we have a lot of tenants that manager just changed, and all this bunch of folks are getting fees between $1,000 and some are even as high as $5,000. So sometimes it just includes mediation. Like, what is going on that all this bunch of fees are going into our tenants? Like, what is the situation? And making sure that we provide that support. So for us, a lot of the times it takes different components. It's the mediation component. It's the making sure that we have that space to meet, having the space, as I mentioned in the House meetings, to have that little bit more comfortable level as well. And then it can take in different formats. So sometimes it's a small committee, sometimes it could be a larger meeting. But our goal is to make sure that there's structure and that people take a role, that they're the ones helping us do the outreach, that they're the ones leading the meeting, and that we're providing that support for them to have the capacity to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with what Matt said. I think tennis associations take a different role. I mean, for us to start one, we go door to door, and we need to sort of figure out what are the interests that are going to bring them out to a meeting. And I think we often struggle with attendance, again, because people got 2 or 3 jobs, or they've got other things more pressing in their life, their kids or whatever that are going on, and so they may not have the time or ability to go to a meeting. But we try to sort of understand what their interests are, bring them to a meeting. Oftentimes for us, there's not a lot of complaints about necessarily the property, but there may be issues around the neighborhood. So we might bring resources like a community police officer to kind of just answer questions, how they, if there's some issue that how they can best interact with the police. Might bring other resources or other speakers. We try to engage in various resident events. So it might be a block party, might be some other activity that kind of brings them together as a way to kind of bond and build relationships. And then it's it's really a function of what their interests are and their ability to attend. So some are really engaged, and this is what they believe in, and they come, and even though they don't necessarily have a lot of issues to tell us about, they feel it's important that they are organized and that they're showing up and giving whatever feedback they can to us. And others, might be more informal, might be just a few people, and that's sort of how it goes.
I'll actually echo what Rob noted and also Mr. Losak. The only thing I'll add is that I noted in my remarks that our resident advisory board, which has formal bylaws, has leadership, part of the bylaws is a requirement that the resident advisory board support those independent tenant associations as they are at whatever stage they are in their development. And so that provides a direct link to the resident advisory board, but also directly to the commissioners. So I think that's the only thing I'll add. But it's organic, and it ebbs and flows. Again, attendance is a challenge, but I think that's also a challenge with regard to the meetings that we're doing in communities as well. But the trick here is to make sure the opportunity for engagement is consistent and sort of obvious to folks.
Okay. All right, so let's turn to the discussion about the funding. And Linda, can you help us? Yeah, sure, Councilmember Joanna.
Just on the organizer's point, so you have 4 paid organizers at CASA, is that right, that do this? Because I think, let me back up, let me preface my question. What everyone just said, critical that you have organizing skills and tactics that you employ, whether it's door to door, being culturally competent, proficient, speaking the language, being approachable, all the things that make good organizers you have to have if you're doing tenant organizing, right? And it's almost more important than other types of organizing because you have all these impediments and people are busy, you got maybe people be fearful, a whole bunch of things that hoops that you've got to jump through. So I'm trying to understand the baseline before we get to the contract discussions we're moving on what do you have in your organization. So CASA, if you could go first, and then Renters Alliance, and then if HOC and MOP, I have a little better understanding, but if you want to supplement, I know you said some of the positions that you have. If you want to supplement it, you can. But, so 4 paid organizers and an attorney that are doing this countywide, or you want to clarify that or expand?
Yes. And also, so I should clarify, and I have other folks here at CASA, so we don't fit at the table.
That's all right.
But
I know you're big.
no, so, and that's why I was looking at them. But it's also, it's regarding to funding. Of course, there's other fundings that help us to make sure that we provide support to tenant organizers. So it's not all completely by the county. So we have to also put a little bit ourselves as well.
Right, but just as far as what you have.
Oh, so what we have, so,
what
yes,
resources you
so
have?
it's 3 organizers, and then it's myself, I'm the manager. We have the legal, the lawyer, and then we have also the, our department that works with policy.
Got it.
Just checking with Matt because he knows the exact numbers, but I know a lot of our organizers are volunteer, and so that's why sustainability, which of course we'll get to that in the funding discussion, but we do sort of have a expanding army, I think, of volunteer organizers, but Matt can give you the rundown.
We have had to operate with our network of volunteers, and we've done pretty well by it. I'm not ashamed to say that a good deal of our supplementary funding has been personal. And I've been able to sustain myself thanks to my dad, who left me some money, but that's gone. So we've really had to utilize the $70,000 that we receive annually for part-time contractors, partly for myself and for operating expenses. But we are victims of our success here in mobilizing a movement for renters' rights in Montgomery County that began with the Tenants Work Group, with the establishment of the Renters Alliance, with strengthening the collaboration with our partners and allies who have a partial or more full interest in renters' rights, and concentrating those efforts. That, we've been behind that. And we've elevated the conversation and the ubiquity of this discussion in our region, which is also mirrored nationally. And because of that, we work with landlord and tenant quite a bit, but we're receiving 5 to 10 phone calls ourselves a week in most cases for very serious landlord-tenant issues. We not only have to fulfill the obligations of our contract of 8 to 12 properties, and then, of course, meetings with key individuals and organizations, responding to invitations to speak to these organizations, and then dealing with individual cases that come to our attention, plus the policy piece of working with landlord-tenant to be more effective, working with state partners on state issues. We are still looking to create the infrastructure that creates the basic capacity that supports that work. So we have a $70,000 budget for a full-time staff member and multiple volunteers and part-time folks with an increasing demand for our services that, as our board chair points out, is not sustainable, but in critical need.
So the full-time staff members, you?
Full-time and a half, I think.
Yeah, right. Then some contractors and a lot of really good volunteers.
Yes, and by the way, we speak pretty much every language that there is. Justin speaks 5 languages. I speak 3, Spanish and French, and of course the critically needed Sesotho, which is in constant demand.
Thank you. Do you all have anything to add on just who you have on board? And then
I think I put in my testimony. We have one sort of outreach coordinator. We have 2 people who are at what we call asset managers, that they're sort of the liaison. They're not necessarily creating tenant associations, but they might support ones that are already existing. And then we have, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 folks who are doing the community life programs on they're sort of site specific. They get sort of tenant issues come to them, but they're really providing the programming and stuff. Yeah.
Got it. That's helpful.
I actually I don't recall the number of folks that are in our resident advisory team, but we obviously have those folks as well as several folks within property management, and then at least one individual in our compliance team. But It's important to note, and I know we're going to talk about cost and et cetera, we don't actually receive grant money for most of that work. There's a small component that we receive for some resident services, but traditional housing finance does not allow a line item for keeping people housed. There's no such thing in there, and so for us, the mixed income model that we're embarking on, that we try to use in virtually every single instance, is what allows us to pay those salaries.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Andrew.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on a couple things. One, you mentioned the 70,000 what you currently operate under. This would raise it. I have a couple questions about that, if you don't mind. One is, maybe I misunderstood, but it seemed to me, based on the background materials, the 70,000 started in March of this year, March 16th. So, and that's a competitive grant, correct?
It's an extension of a competitive grant.
An extension of a competitive grant. What was the other funding that the organization was receiving in the current fiscal year prior to that?
It's the same. It's an extension of the same contract.
It's been 70,000 for, three years?
Is there a reason why it's not tied to the fiscal year that starts in March? I mean, towards the end of the fiscal, I mean, it's 3/4 the way through.
What happened was
fiscal
the
year.
council,
It seems odd.
the council, I believe in 2013, declined to fund us as a grant, and required that it be a RFP. First, it was at that time, the council could have earmarked grants, and then the council, I believe, changed its rules. The council member
I don't think it was
Reamer
it was more recently than that, I think. But,
It was 2013. I think it was 13.
Okay.
I'm not sure, but decided that the earmarks would no longer be permitted by council, and so the earmark that we were receiving was denied, and then the county executive doubled the grant. We were receiving 35 and 35, so he doubled the grant. Then the council at that time.
Sorry, 35 and 35 meaning for
35 from the council, 35 from the county executive.
Oh, the two different grants.
Two different grants,
Sorry,
and
I was
those
trying
were
to
70,000. Then the county executive doubled it to 70,000, but then the council determined that it needed to be an RFP. And so then the RFP was let, but that created a delay of multiple months. And then the RFP was, I believe, let in December. We finally signed a contract when we won the bid, we signed a contract in March. That's why we're askew with that particular contract.
So how many years has it been March as your funding?
This is our third contract from the first contract win.
Okay, and then in fiscal year 16, I guess it would have been, how did you function for the first 9 months of the year with no money?
We did it on volunteer basis and personal funds.
In the first round. So now once the.
No, I understand. Fiscal year 16, which
Right.
is what I'm saying,
They had
there was
it.
a lapse of 9 months of funding, and you
You're welcome to look at my tax return.
bubble gum and no, I'm asking because I think it's a legitimate question.
We struggled. We struggled.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the tenants struggled as well. But as I say, one of the things that we've been particularly good at is maintaining a network of alliances and working with volunteers. But as I say, we were not nearly as effective as we would have liked to have been. And as I mentioned earlier, with the 455 and 233 properties and the nearly 400,000 residents living in rental housing, we were only scratching the surface. What we could do, and what we did sustain very well, is maintaining this conversation about rental issues in this region, and of course, maintaining this momentum of tenants and other organizations speaking to it, saying, hey, look, our housing is critical for our students' education, for our health, for community prosperity.
When the fiscal year 16 issue came up, and obviously this question of competitive funding, whether or not you'd be funded, I mean, for 9 months you had the painful awareness, it seems, unfortunately, of the tenuous nature of public funding for sustaining an organization that does really important work. I think we all agree on that.
We've known that from day one.
Are there today efforts to raise outside funding beyond the county's funding, and what success have you seen? How much have you been able to raise? What are the
In the big picture for the Renters Alliance, and it's worth knowing, and as a new council member, the history a little bit. There were 1,000 renters who came together that I and a few other tenant leaders in the county created a petition that we sent to the council and to the county executive, urging that there be a focus on tenant issues. The county, there were 3 things that were immediately rejected, and 1 thing was immediately accepted, and that was a task force to focus on these issues. And the county executive appointed the tenants work group, which I chaired. And we put together for 2 years a report with more than 50, and CASA also participated, as did the Landlords Association and a number of other organizations. We put together a report of 50 recommendations. It took 2 years for the county executive's Department of Housing to respond, but they put together a memo of things that they agreed should be implemented. 2 years later, county council member Elrich put together Bill 1915. The discussion out of the tenants work group was, and at the time, the county budget was in real peril. And so there was no appetite for creating, as we had suggested, an office of the tenant advocate. Nobody wanted to build out the government to create that function. So it was determined that we would create and we're not talking about an individual staffer, but an actual department like the Washington, D.C. has, which is a $4.5 to $5 million operation. So it was determined that a Renters Alliance dedicated to this function would be an inexpensive alternative to creating that. But there was a promise, at least inherent in that discussion, that as the need grew and as we established with initial seed money our infrastructure, that there would be increasing funding to support this operation.
Do we have a report of that, or is there, I mean, I understand these discussions have been.
Is available.
And was there a dollar amount associated with that, and timing, and a ramp up, and specific activities that were expected, and what the funding was going to
get you the previous.
I mean, I reckon I'm new here, and I have followed it tangentially, but not as closely as perhaps I will now, obviously, as this being my job. But it'd be helpful for me to understand, because that wasn't part of the discussion when we asked about the $218,000. This wasn't. We are fulfilling the agreed upon council acceptance of a report.
No, and I wouldn't characterize it that way either, except to say that there was an expectation that not only was there a recognition of the need, the growing need, but that by a number of quarters that we were not funded to what we were expected to perform.
And do we have metrics based off of that? And you've with the 70,000, you're far exceeding, but you can't meet the expectation. I mean,
you're happy to get into a more detailed about what we do and what the needs are. The big picture is, again, going from when we started this with 23% of the county in rental housing to nearly 40% now. And for that matter, I imagine, even though there was no 311 when we started the tenants work group, to the extent to which 311 has been tracking the number of calls coming in about rental housing, my guess is that DHCA would be able to show a hockey stick of increased complaints and issues across the county. And the same thing with code enforcement and other issues.
Yeah, I don't think there's any argument over need. I am actually not even arguing the work that you do and that it's really important and critical work. I think my challenge that I have is the expectation that taxpayers have of the money that we are spending and what level of transparency, accountability, and oversight we have over that money, and whether or not it's perceived as appropriate to not have more specific parameters for exactly what the needs are and how we meet those needs and how we determine and assess the outcomes of whether or not we are meeting those needs. That, again, that's not I hope you don't take this the wrong way. My line of questioning into thinking that I am in any way challenging the work that you or any of the other organizations do. What I have some real concerns about is that we don't have as much of a method to the madness as I think I would personally be comfortable with of how we got from 70 to 218,000, why we're starting in March with the non-competitive, what's the difference between the competitive and the non-competitive? What's the percentage that we think is appropriate for staffing and for programming? And, I don't have the answers to those questions, but I'm not sure that I'm fully confident and feel great about whether or not those questions have been asked and sufficiently answered, if that makes sense.
Can I take it from
Yeah,
here?
please.
Okay. So the county council, the full council met, and we talked about this funding, and we said we wanted to move forward with funding $218,000 as recommended. That money was appropriated in the budget, so that money is there. The only question is, how will it be accessed and by whom? And Linda has done a nice job recommending a few alternatives of how we could proceed. I want to say that, one of those alternatives is one that we heard about already having had quite a consequence for the organization, which was the RFP process. I think, Linda advises, and I know from my experience here, if we were to say we're going to turn this into a competitive bid process, we'll be sitting here in a year, and we'll be finding out that the money was finally flowing in March of 2020. That's the way processes unfortunately seem to work, and we need to understand that and fix that. But so on that basis, I don't recommend personally that we say that the money is appropriated. However, we want to see a competitive bid process to access it. I just don't think we're going to get the result that we want there. I think we're going to result in too much delay. So that leaves few options in my assessment. One of them is to go along with the initial recommendation, which it didn't feel to me that the council was enthusiastic about saying all 218 goes to one organization. I think the council's interest was in potentially supporting several organizations so that we're trying to attack this from different directions and learning and getting track records and understanding the best value for the dollar. So to me, that leads on page 8. We've got a sort of explanation of the different methods that are available. One is the non-competitive award process, which could be used, but I haven't heard the greatest report on how that might function in this particular setting. And then the other is the method that we used last year for the legal services funds for deportation assistance. Linda, can you just explain these a little bit more?
I know you all have an event you wish to go to.
Yeah.
I would just say that perhaps one of the things, in the budget process, what you received was a recommendations for funding and what was expected from that funding. So one of the things that might be a way to proceed, if the committee still is comfortable with where the council comments were when you had the council discussion, is that you could use this abbreviated process. It still does result in a non-competitive award under our procurement rules, so I want to be very clear about that. But for the legal funding, there was a solicitation that was put together. It was put out for a short period of time, enough to give organizations an opportunity to respond. The executive branch puts together a review panel and makes recommendations, and then in order to move things forward quickly, the CAO in the legal services issue sent over a request for authorization of a non-competitive award. In that case, there were 3 awards made with the money, but it inserted an open solicitation, some competition and proposal into a process in a way that allowed it to take place in a shorter period of time.
So DHCA could say, here's broadly what we want to achieve, but we would like to.
So I think one of the things, and I would just say, when you discuss this in budget, you didn't have some of the information now that's coming around related to the work regarding the census.
So let's hear about it.
So, it might be that a way to move forward is to have folks think a little bit about maybe what a solicitation would look like and come back and maybe share that structure so we could be moving forward on this. And take into account, because CASA also has mentioned census work, so clearly,
Yeah, I
was just going to say how DHCA wants to put forward a solicitation, how that is or isn't integrated into work around the census is another issue. But one of the things to move this forward, given time constraints of today, is maybe to just endorse this idea that the council had of using this same process and then see what the proposal would look like, the solicitation proposal would look like, and take the discussion from there.
I think that's what we ought to do. I think that was the spirit of the council's dialogue, and I think this is a good solution potentially for the problem at hand, which is how to be efficient and meet objectives without relying upon a process that we know is not going to work well. Can we hear about the census issue and the relationship here? Because
just to add to it, again, in our letter to the council, we emphasized, and I'd like to emphasize again, that the $218,000 that we proposed to the county executive and that he put in the budget to support our work was so that we could get to a minimum staffing level of some of our colleagues and enjoy that and be able to implement that. We have also pursued outside funding. We have grant funding and we have private funding that comes into us. It doesn't support full-time staffing yet, but we do have a number of grants and private funding that do come in to sustain some of our operational costs, but not enough to support full-time staff, which in the 218 would be 3 full-time staff. We have a $100,000 grant from the state in recognition of our work directly with renters and recognition that renters are among the lowest count in the census count. And so we received that grant to do that work. We will be able to do that work under any circumstances, but it was envisioned by us and certainly by the county executive and hopefully by the council that if we are in a position to have staff and to expand the targeted properties, which is in the proposal, from 8 to 12 to 12 to 40 to 40, 50, as well as focus on 3 to 6 troubled properties to create a teamwork approach to dealing with those properties, as well as more community outreach and marketing, which is what all of that funding would provide, that we would be able to leverage that $100,000 more effectively. We will meet the obligations of that grant regardless, but I think everybody in the council and everybody in the county has an interest in our effectiveness with that grant.
Okay, you just made a distinction there that I hadn't quite identified. So your proposal this year was to get to 40 or 50 properties, including 3 to 6 troubled properties. Why wouldn't the focus, I'll send this back to DHCA, why wouldn't the focus be almost entirely on troubled properties? Isn't that where we need the most help?
Certainly, that would be the sensible solution for that. I don't know that we selected the full scale of the properties, but we were looking for 30 to 40 properties.
Say that again?
So we were looking for 30 to 40 properties.
You hadn't decided that they were troubled or not troubled.
Yeah, exactly.
I see. Is there a reason why you distinguish the two? Could they be the same?
We're
In the
delighted
response that you had
Yeah.
at budget, it did have 2 pieces. It had adding 30 rental properties, which would get you to 38 to 42 total properties. And it did talk about having a task force for 3 to 6 properties identified by DHCA and the Renters Alliance in the troubled property category for this focused rental housing task force.
And that's a kind of a model program that we proposed a while ago to deal specifically with Charterhouse, frankly. That was not ultimately supported by the management of Charterhouse. But in some of these properties, we have multiple problems. Not only do you have code enforcement problems, but you have landlord-tenant communications problems. You have problems with people being abused or neglected in some way. And we also have a problem of poor information. And so it was our proposal that we get all of the players at the table to create a punch list of those things that need to be repaired, to create an issue list of those things that need to be addressed to make sure that management and tenants are at the table along with others to sort of guide this process. And that would be kind of a model program. We would love to have the capacity to do it at every single property. As for the 30 to 40 that we would hit, and by the way, that doesn't include properties that we return to, which are in addition to that as far as our work capacity goes. We find that there are certainly properties that are ailing and in big trouble. We worked with CASA at Flower Branch After the explosion, they had not gotten their locks repaired, and we needed to get that done immediately. The security apparatus there that was abusing the tenants and telling them they couldn't walk around the property or questioning them, we had to deal with that then too. And those properties certainly need that kind of urgent attention. But when we go to other properties, we find hundreds of tenants who do not know what their rights are, who have been afraid to speak up, who don't understand the nature of a tenants association, its value of working in the collective welfare, who also need this assistance. And so from the Renters Alliance standpoint, we see the universe of renters needing this support. And I would certainly love additional resources to add to those properties that are in urgent trouble.
Okay, we've got some more questions. I mean, I think this speaks to why we should proceed with the additional treatment of having a solicitation for responses to scope of services to identify what some of our goals are. I think we need a little more thought into what it is that we're trying to get out of this as a county government with these responsibilities that we have, and not necessarily just let the organizations drive what it is that they want to do. And it might be important, or it might be that we have some more urgent priorities that we want to ensure that the funding is targeted towards, and so I think that this could help us sharpen what our expectations are. So I'm going to go to Will first, because I think Andrew went most recently.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to staff, Linda, if we do the solicitation process, the way I read this, it seems like the executives and the CAO are driving that through a committee, and they could still come back with the same proposal.
They could.
They could still come back and say at the end of this process that we want to give the money to Renters Alliance. That could happen, correct?
They could. So I'll just say we have one experience with this process, and it actually worked out quite well in the outcome. We knew the solicitation is public. It can be shared. We could share it ahead of time before it's posted. I'm sure we could ask to have it shared with you so you could see what the solicitation says. You would be able to know who responds. You don't see actual proposals until you have an award, but you can know like who responds. So you could know, like, did 4 organizations respond? Did 1 organization respond? Whatever that was. In the legal services one, we actually did end up funding an organization that the county had never funded before. So we had multiple responses, including people that had not come forward before. So it does give an opportunity to have something out there to understand better, who's out there able to provide service.
Right. Well, I know, I get that, and
Yeah.
I think that's a different situation in that there was a willingness on the executive side to explore.
Right.
I think I haven't talked to the county executive. You're sitting here, maybe you have, Tim, but it's a totally possible outcome.
It is.
That they just come back with the same proposal, and we've waited 6 months or however long it's going to take. I don't know. What was the time period? That was the other
Actually,
thing.
it came back right in the fall when the council
So,
came
like,
back.
it was more like a 3-month period.
Yeah, it was, because it's really falling, frankly, it's this hybrid process. I think the solicitation was only out for a couple weeks, and then people came together really quickly. So the idea was to come back really soon when the council came back.
I agree with Council Member Reamer that we do need to figure out more what our goals are here, no matter who gets the money, and because it's clear that there's some, maybe the organization thinks this is the priority, the DHCA is saying that, so I think that's important. My concern is I want to make sure we're doing something this year, so it sounds like within this process we can still be doing that. So in that case, I don't have a problem. I will just point out that it is possible that since the CAO and the executive are going to pick somebody that can still come back with the same thing.
Well, but to that point, I think it should be our committee's direction that we want to see several organizations supported. We can't ultimately, we're not the contracting agent, but I think
You have to know who responds.
and we have to know who responds, and there's a lot to be determined.
I think there's a problem there, but because we're going to know who responds, but we don't know the proposals.
That's true, too.
And so how do we, I don't know if I want to say personally, it should be more organizations. I want whoever does it to be culturally competent and it to happen in a good way. That might mean more organizations, but it might not. And I just think that from my perspective, I'm happy to go with the majority of the committee, and I know the colleagues from the larger council wanted to do this, but I'm just pointing out that we might get the same thing back and we've wasted some time. So let's find out what we're doing with the money for sure. But if we can't look at the proposals, I don't know what value added is to me as a council member to just say, oh, 3 organizations who sit here have applied, but I don't know what they've proposed to do. So I just think absent that, I don't know if we can change that part of it. If I could get that information, that would be helpful in the council determining whether to.
I don't know that we can make a decision on the proposal, but we can see them. Isn't that right, Linda?
Yeah, well, I would
Saves
need
you
some
couldn't,
time to talk to executive staff. I
Okay.
think, you know, if
All right.
since this process is a hybrid, right? There's no it's not in the procurement regs, right? So I think it would be good to have a little time for follow-up on
Sure.
what we.
No, I agree. I just want to point that out. So
Yes.
thank you.
It's definitely a fair point, and I appreciate that, and I recognize the difference of whose job it is to do what, and I think we should respect those lines. But at the same time, our job is to provide oversight, and if we don't know what we're investing $218,000 in, I think it's inappropriate for us to invest it. So I think that getting the scope of services that are clearly defined and have measurable outcomes associated with them is a significant add, not just for the council, but even more importantly for the public, to be able to demonstrate that when we are offering non-competitive grants, that we are doing so in a way that is focused on outcomes and not just on who knows how to ask the right person in the right way. And I think that we need to be cautious and careful about that. I think from what I have heard, I think the challenge is, and I recognize the need, but we're talking about almost like a public-private partnership, that we recognize the need for a tenant advocacy office. We're not going to have it because we don't have the money to invest in it. And so we have this nonprofit that's doing some of this work, and we're trying to turn it into a tenant advocacy office. I have some discomfort with that arrangement unless we have some more significant oversight than what currently exists. And so for that reason, I would second the chair's view, and I think that you will do very well when you bid on some of this work, because you've been doing a lot of this work, but I think we can do a better job of clarifying exactly what we're going to get out of this. And I'd like to make sure that we, prior to this going out for the 2 weeks or however long it's going to be, that we do get transmitted to us, perhaps through staff, the specific solicitation with the scope of service, with the different aspects of it, so that we are aware. I don't have an interest in serving on the committee, but I'd like to know what the committee is reviewing. And I think just the larger point for me is, he who has the gold makes the rules. In this case, we have the gold and we aren't making the rules, as has been clear from the discrepancy between, what the scope is going to be. So hopefully we can clarify that, we can get that worked out, we can move forward in a timely manner, but do it in a way that demonstrates to the public that we are respecting their taxpayer dollars in the most efficient, effective way possible, while serving this obvious and clear need that we have that's growing. It's not diminishing in our community, and that's very clear. So thank you to everybody for your work, and I would formally second the proposal with the transmittal of the scope of service as a friendly amendment to that.
Okay, I think we're all on the same page on this, on the same page here.
So we'll work together and get back
Okay.
in the process.
Sorry that ran long. We are not going to be able to get to the next items. We've been invited by the county executive to a flag raising on a very important issue. So we're going to run across the street and we'll continue the discussion on the next items at a future date.